The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned streets of Atlanta as Maya Johnson pressed her back against the crumbling brick wall, her heart pounding in her chest. 3 weeks had passed since the outbreak began, and the world she once knew had transformed into a nightmare of shuffling corpses and desperate survivors. The sound of dragging feet echoed from around the corner, accompanied by the low, guttural moans that had become the soundtrack of humanity's downfall. Maya clutched her makeshift weapon, a crowbar she'd salvaged from a hardware store, and steadied her breathing. At 28, she had been a nurse at Grady Hospital, accustomed to saving lives, not taking them. But the rules had changed when the dead began to walk, and survival had become the only priority that mattered. The zombie that rounded the corner had once been someone's father, judging by the tattered business suit hanging from its decaying frame. Its milky eyes fixed on Maya with predatory hunger, and it lurched forward with surprising speed. Maya didn't hesitate. She swung the crowbar with precision, connecting with the creature's skull in a sickening crunch that sent it crumpling to the asphalt. She had learned early that hesitation meant death, and death in this new world meant joining the ranks of the undead. As she wiped the dark blood from her weapon, Maya heard voices echoing from a nearby building, human voices speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Following the sound, Maya discovered 3 other women barricaded inside what had once been a small grocery store. The first was Keisha Williams, a former police officer whose tactical vest and confident demeanor immediately commanded respect. Her dark skin bore several fresh scars, evidence of recent encounters with the infected, but her eyes remained sharp and determined. Beside her stood Amara Thompson, a mechanic whose oil-stained coveralls and calloused hands spoke of a lifetime working with her hands. The third woman, Zara Davis, appeared younger than the others, perhaps in her early 20s, but the military-style backpack and the way she handled her rifle suggested combat experience that belied her age. "You alone out there?" Keisha asked, her hand resting on the grip of her service weapon as she studied Maya through the reinforced glass door. Maya nodded, raising her hands to show she meant no harm. "Lost my group yesterday when we tried to reach the evacuation center downtown. Turns out it was overrun." The women exchanged glances before Amara moved to unlock the door, her movements quick and efficient. "Welcome to the club," she said grimly. "We've all lost people. Question is, what are you planning to do about it?" As Maya stepped inside, she noticed the women had transformed the store into a fortress. Shelves had been moved to block windows, creating firing positions while still allowing visibility. Supplies were organized with military precision, and a detailed map of the city covered one wall, marked with red X's indicating zombie concentrations and green circles showing potential safe zones. "We're not just surviving," Zara explained, following Maya's gaze. "We're fighting back. Every zombie we put down is one less threat to other survivors. Every safe zone we clear is another chance for humanity to regroup." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through a gap in their barricade, they could see a group of survivors running down the street, pursued by at least 20 zombies. Among the fleeing people, Maya recognized a family, a mother carrying a small child while an older man, probably the grandfather, struggled to keep pace. "They won't make it," Keisha observed, already checking her ammunition. "Not with that many infected on their tail." Without hesitation, the 4 women began moving with practiced coordination. Amara grabbed a modified crossbow while Zara shouldered her rifle. Keisha drew her sidearm and Maya gripped her crowbar tighter. "We go out the back, circle around, and hit them from behind," Keisha commanded, her police training evident in her tactical thinking. "Amara, you take the high ground on that fire escape. Zara, find a position with clear sight lines. Maya and I will engage up close." The plan was simple but effective, relying on their diverse skills and the element of surprise. As they moved into position, Maya felt a surge of purpose she hadn't experienced since the outbreak began. These women weren't just survivors, they were warriors, and together they represented something the zombie apocalypse couldn't destroy: hope. The first zombie fell to Amara's crossbow bolt, dropping silently to the pavement. Zara's rifle cracked twice, and 2 more infected collapsed with precise headshots. Maya and Keisha charged into the remaining group, their weapons finding their marks with deadly efficiency. The crowbar crushed skulls while Keisha's pistol barked repeatedly, each shot carefully aimed to conserve ammunition. Within minutes, the threat was eliminated and the surviving family was safe. The mother looked at the 4 women with tears of gratitude, clutching her child tighter. "Thank you," she whispered. "We thought we were going to die." As the rescued survivors disappeared into a nearby building to tend to their wounds, the 4 women regrouped in the street. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Maya of better times. "This is what we do," Keisha said, reloading her weapon. "We save who we can and we make the dead stay dead." Amara nodded in agreement, already scanning the area for more threats. "The question is, where do we go from here? This neighborhood is getting too hot, and we're running low on supplies." Zara pointed to the map she'd pulled from her backpack. "There's a rumor about a safe zone being established north of the city. Military checkpoint, walls, the works. Might be worth investigating." Maya looked at her new companions, these fierce women who had chosen to fight rather than simply survive, and felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: belonging. The abandoned warehouse district stretched before them like a concrete graveyard, its broken windows reflecting the pale morning light as the four women made their way through the debris-strewn streets. Maya adjusted the straps of her newly acquired backpack, filled with medical supplies they'd scavenged from a pharmacy the night before. The weight felt reassuring against her shoulders, a tangible reminder of their growing preparedness. Beside her, Keisha moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to dangerous situations, her eyes constantly scanning for threats while her hand remained close to her weapon. The former police officer had taken point naturally, her tactical experience invaluable in navigating the treacherous urban landscape that Atlanta had become. Amara brought up the rear, her mechanical expertise having proven invaluable when they'd encountered a locked security gate earlier that morning. She'd bypassed the electronic lock in minutes, her fingers working with the same precision she'd once used to repair engines. Now she carried a modified tool belt filled with improvised weapons and useful gadgets, transforming everyday items into instruments of survival. Zara walked in the middle of their formation, her military training evident in the way she maintained situational awareness while studying the hand-drawn map that had led them to this industrial section of the city. According to the information they'd gathered from other survivors, this area contained a cache of weapons and supplies hidden by a group of preppers before the outbreak overwhelmed them. The silence was broken by a sound that made all four women freeze instantly, the distinctive crack of breaking glass, followed by the unmistakable moan of the infected. Maya felt her pulse quicken as she recognized the pattern they'd all learned to fear, the sound of zombies discovering fresh prey. Through the broken windows of a nearby factory, they could see movement, shadows shifting against the dim interior light. "Sounds like someone's in trouble," Keisha whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing chorus of undead voices. The moaning was getting louder, more urgent, suggesting that whatever was happening inside the building was escalating rapidly. Zara pulled out a pair of binoculars and studied the factory's exterior, noting the multiple entry points and the fire escape that zigzagged up the building's side. "I count at least 15 infected converging on the main floor," she reported quietly. "But there's definitely someone alive in there. I can see a light moving around on the second level." Amara checked her crossbow and counted her bolts, her expression grim but determined. "Whoever it is won't last long with that many zombies. We need to move fast if we're going to help." Maya gripped her crowbar tighter, the familiar weight of the weapon providing comfort as she prepared for another life-or-death encounter. The plan they devised was born from their growing experience as a team. Keisha would create a distraction at the main entrance, drawing as many zombies as possible away from the interior. Amara would use the fire escape to reach the second floor and locate the survivor, while Zara provided cover fire from an elevated position across the street. Maya would follow Amara up the fire escape, ready to provide medical assistance to whoever they found inside. It was a risky strategy that relied on precise timing and trust in each other's abilities, but they had learned that calculated risks were often the difference between saving lives and watching people die. As they moved into position, Maya caught sight of their target through a second-floor window, a young woman probably in her early 20s frantically barricading a door while zombies pounded against it from the other side. The survivors' movements were becoming increasingly desperate as the door began to splinter under the relentless assault. "She's running out of time," Maya called softly to Amara, who was already climbing the fire escape with practiced efficiency. The metal structure groaned under their weight, but it held firm as they ascended toward the trapped woman. Keisha's distraction worked perfectly. The sound of her voice shouting taunts at the zombies, combined with the clatter of thrown debris, drew most of the infected away from the stairwell and toward the main entrance. Zara's rifle began its deadly work, picking off zombies with methodical precision while Keisha used her superior mobility to stay ahead of the shambling horde. Meanwhile, Maya and Amara reached the second-floor window just as the barricaded door finally gave way. The trapped woman, a college student named Jasmine Carter, they would later learn, stumbled backward as 3 zombies burst through the opening, their decaying hands reaching for her with mindless hunger. Amara's crossbow bolt took down the first zombie instantly, while Maya vaulted through the window and brought her crowbar down on the second infected creature's skull. Jasmine grabbed a broken chair leg and managed to drive it through the third zombie's eye socket, her survival instincts overcoming her obvious terror. "This way," Maya shouted, helping the shaken young woman toward the window as more zombies began climbing the stairs. The sound of Zara's rifle continued to echo from outside, each shot buying them precious seconds to escape. The descent down the fire escape became a race against time as infected poured into the building below them. Jasmine's hands shook as she climbed, but she kept moving with the determination of someone who refused to give up. When they reached the ground level, Keisha was waiting with a clear path to their extraction point, having successfully led the main group of zombies away from their escape route. "Move, move, move," she called, and the 5 women ran through the industrial maze, their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls as they put distance between themselves and the factory. They didn't stop running until they reached an abandoned gas station several blocks away, where they finally allowed themselves to catch their breath. Jasmine collapsed against a rusted fuel pump, her chest heaving as the reality of her rescue began to sink in. "I thought I was dead," she gasped, looking at the 4 women who had risked their lives to save her. "I've been hiding in that building for 2 days watching those things multiply outside. When they finally found me, I thought it was over." Maya knelt beside her, checking for injuries while the others maintained watch. "What's your story?" she asked gently. "How did you end up alone in that factory?" Jasmine's tale was heartbreakingly familiar. A college student studying engineering at Georgia Tech when the outbreak began, she had lost her roommates in the initial chaos and had been surviving alone ever since. Her technical knowledge had helped her stay alive, using her understanding of building systems to find secure hiding places and avoid zombie concentrations. "I heard about the safe zone up north," she said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "I was trying to make my way there when I got trapped." Keisha exchanged glances with the others, recognizing the same determination they had all felt when choosing to fight rather than simply hide. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges, the 5 women shared their meager supplies and planned their next move. The addition of Jasmine to their group brought new skills. Her engineering background complemented Amara's mechanical expertise, while her youth and energy reminded them all of what they were fighting to preserve. "We're stronger together," Zara observed, cleaning her rifle as she spoke. "Every person we save, every zombie we put down, every day we survive, it all matters." Maya nodded in agreement, feeling the truth of those words in her bones. They were no longer just 4 women trying to survive. They were becoming something more powerful, something that the zombie apocalypse couldn't destroy, a family forged in fire and united by purpose. The abandoned shopping mall loomed before them like a monument to a lost civilization, its broken neon signs and shattered storefronts telling the story of humanity's rapid fall. Maya led the group through the employee entrance they discovered behind the food court, her medical training making her naturally cautious about potential infection risks in enclosed spaces. The air inside was stale and heavy, carrying the unmistakable scent of decay that had become all too familiar in their new world. Keisha moved beside her with practiced silence, her police training evident in how she cleared each corner before advancing, while Amara carried a modified crowbar that doubled as both weapon and tool for forcing open the security gates that blocked access to several stores. Zara had positioned herself near the main entrance with her rifle, maintaining overwatch while Jasmine worked on bypassing the mall's security system to access the upper levels where they hoped to find the medical supplies Maya desperately needed. The young engineering student had proven invaluable over the past few days, her technical skills complementing their combat abilities in ways that made their missions significantly more efficient. "I've got the elevators working," Jasmine called softly from the security office, her voice echoing slightly in the vast empty space. "But we should stick to the stairs anyway, too much noise and we'll attract every zombie in a 5-mile radius." The pharmacy they sought was located on the 2nd floor, past a maze of abandoned stores that had been hastily looted during the initial panic. Mannequins lay scattered across the walkways like fallen soldiers, their plastic limbs creating obstacles that the women navigated with careful precision. Maya's heart ached as she passed a children's clothing store, its colorful displays now covered in dust and debris, a stark reminder of the innocent lives lost to the outbreak. She forced herself to focus on their mission: antibiotics, pain medication, and surgical supplies that could mean the difference between life and death for future survivors they encountered. The sound of shuffling feet from the level below made them all freeze instantly. Through the gaps in the decorative railing, they could see a small group of zombies wandering aimlessly through the main concourse, their movements random and purposeless until something attracted their attention. 6 of them, Keisha whispered, counting the infected as they shambled between the abandoned kiosks. Probably been trapped in here since the outbreak started. We can avoid them if we stay quiet and stick to the upper level. Amara nodded in agreement, but kept her weapon ready as they continued toward their destination. The pharmacy's security gate had been partially damaged during the initial looting, leaving just enough space for a determined person to squeeze through. Maya went first, her smaller frame allowing her to navigate the opening more easily than the others. Inside, she found exactly what they needed, shelves still stocked with medications that desperate survivors had overlooked in their rush to grab more obvious supplies. She began filling her backpack methodically, prioritizing antibiotics and pain relievers while also grabbing supplies for treating wounds and infections. "This is better than I hoped," she called quietly to the others. "Enough here to treat dozens of people." While Maya worked, the others maintained security and searched the surrounding stores for additional useful items. Jasmine discovered a sporting goods store that contained camping gear and water purification tablets, while Amara found a hardware store with tools that could be modified into weapons or used for fortifying safe houses. Zara located a bookstore where she gathered survival manuals and medical reference guides that could prove invaluable in their ongoing fight for survival. The mall was turning out to be a treasure trove of resources that could sustain them for weeks. Their systematic looting was interrupted by a sound that chilled them all to the bone, the distinctive crash of breaking glass, followed by the urgent moans of zombies who had detected fresh prey. Through the skylight above, they could see that a group of survivors was being pursued across the mall's parking lot by at least 30 infected. The fleeing people were heading directly toward the main entrance, unaware that they were about to trap themselves in an enclosed space with limited escape routes. "We have to help them," Maya said immediately, her medical training making it impossible for her to ignore people in distress. Keisha was already moving toward the stairs, her tactical mind calculating angles and positions. "Amara, get to the sporting goods store and grab anything that can be used as a projectile weapon. Jasmine, see if you can get the mall's PA system working. We need to guide those survivors away from the main entrance and toward the emergency exits." Zara shouldered her rifle and began looking for elevated positions that would give her clear shots at the approaching zombie horde. Maya grabbed her medical kit, knowing that the survivors would likely need immediate treatment once they were safe. The group of survivors burst through the main entrance just as the first zombies reached the doors. There were 7 of them, a family of 4 including 2 young children, an elderly man who appeared to be injured, and 2 teenagers who looked like they had been traveling together. The family's father was carrying a baseball bat, while one of the teenagers wielded a kitchen knife, but their weapons seemed pitifully inadequate against the growing number of infected pouring into the mall. "Up here," Keisha shouted from the second level, her voice carrying clearly across the open space. "Emergency exit at the north end, follow the signs." The battle that followed tested every skill they had developed as a team. Zara's rifle cracked repeatedly from her position near the food court, each shot carefully aimed to thin the zombie horde without risking the survivors below. Amara had found a cache of baseball bats and was dropping them down to the fleeing people, giving them better weapons to defend themselves. Jasmine's voice echoed through the PA system, providing clear directions to the emergency exits while also creating noise distractions that drew some zombies away from the main group. Maya positioned herself near the emergency exit, ready to provide medical assistance to anyone who needed it. The elderly man stumbled and fell just as 3 zombies closed in on him. Without hesitation, Keisha vaulted over the railing and dropped to the lower level, her police training allowing her to land safely despite the 15-foot fall. She reached the man just as the first zombie lunged, her crowbar connecting with its skull in a devastating blow that sent it crashing into a nearby planter. The second zombie fell to a precise strike to the temple, while the third was brought down by the elderly man himself, who had grabbed one of Amara's dropped baseball bats and swung it with surprising strength. As the last of the zombies fell and the survivors reached safety, Maya began triaging the injured while the others secured the area. The elderly man had a deep gash on his leg that required immediate attention, while one of the children had scraped her knee during the frantic escape. The family's mother was in shock but physically unharmed, clutching her children while her husband stood guard with his newly acquired baseball bat. The 2 teenagers introduced themselves as Marcus and Destiny, siblings who had been traveling from Birmingham when their car broke down outside the city. "You saved our lives," the father said, his voice thick with emotion as Maya finished bandaging the elderly man's wound. "We've been running for 3 days straight and when we saw this place we thought it might be safe." Keisha shook her head grimly. Nowhere's really safe anymore. But we can teach you how to make anywhere safer. As the group settled in for the night, using the mall's security office as a temporary base, Maya looked around at the faces illuminated by their small camping lanterns. They had started as 4 women fighting to survive, but they were becoming something more, a beacon of hope in a world that had forgotten what hope looked like. Tomorrow they would continue north toward the rumored safe zone, but tonight they had proven once again that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its weapons or walls, but in its willingness to risk everything for strangers who needed help. The highway stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of cracked asphalt littered with abandoned vehicles that told silent stories of humanity's desperate flight from the cities. Maya walked alongside the convoy of survivors they had rescued, her medical bag bouncing against her hip as she kept pace with the elderly man whose leg wound was healing better than expected. The group had grown to 12 people now, including 3 children whose laughter seemed almost surreal against the backdrop of their apocalyptic journey. Keisha had naturally assumed leadership of the expanded group, her police training and natural authority making her the obvious choice for coordinating their movement and security protocols. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as they navigated between the skeletal remains of cars and trucks, some still containing the mummified remains of their former owners. Amara had fashioned a cart from shopping cart wheels and metal sheeting, allowing them to transport their growing collection of supplies without exhausting the weaker members of their group. Jasmine walked beside her, the 2 women having bonded over their shared technical knowledge and their determination to find practical solutions to their survival challenges. Zara maintained her position as rear guard, her rifle ready and her eyes constantly scanning for threats that might approach from behind. The silence of the highway was broken by Marcus, one of the teenagers they had rescued from the mall, who pointed toward a cluster of buildings visible in the distance. "Looks like a truck stop," he called out, his young voice carrying hope that the adults had learned to temper with caution. Through her binoculars, Keisha could see that the facility appeared intact, with several large trucks still parked in the lot and no obvious signs of zombie activity. "Could be a good place to rest and resupply," she announced to the group. "But we approach carefully and clear it systematically before anyone gets comfortable." As they drew closer to the truck stop, Maya noticed something that made her heart race with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Smoke was rising from one of the buildings, not the thick, black smoke of destruction, but the thin, controlled smoke of a cooking fire. "Someone's alive in there," she whispered to Keisha, who had already noticed the same sign. The possibility of finding other survivors was always exciting, but experience had taught them that not all survivors were friendly, and some were more dangerous than the zombies themselves. They had encountered raiders twice during their journey, groups of desperate people who had chosen to take what they needed rather than work for it. The truck stop's parking lot was eerily quiet as they approached, their footsteps echoing off the concrete despite their attempts at stealth. Several of the abandoned trucks had their doors standing open, suggesting that their drivers had fled in panic when the outbreak began. Zara positioned herself behind a concrete barrier with a clear view of the main building, while Amara and Jasmine circled around to check the rear entrances. Maya stayed with the main group of survivors, ready to provide medical assistance if the situation turned violent, while Keisha approached the front entrance with her weapon drawn but not obviously threatening. The door opened before Keisha could knock, revealing a woman in her 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that quickly assessed the group before her. "You folks look like you've been traveling hard," she said, her voice carrying a slight southern accent that spoke of deep roots in the region. Behind her, Maya could see 2 other people, a man roughly the same age and a younger woman who appeared to be their daughter. "Name's Patricia Williams and this is my husband Robert and our daughter Nicole. We've been running this place as a safe haven for travelers since the government evacuation centers failed." The interior of the truck stop had been transformed into a well-organized survival compound. The convenience store shelves had been restocked with canned goods and medical supplies, while the restaurant area had been converted into a communal dining space where several other survivors were sharing a meal. Patricia explained that they had been taking in travelers for weeks, providing food, medical care, and information about safe routes north. "We've got a radio set up in the back," Robert added, his weathered hands gesturing toward a door marked "Employees Only." "Been in contact with other survivor groups and that military safe zone everyone's talking about." The news about the safe zone sent a ripple of excitement through their group, but Maya noticed that Patricia's expression remained cautiously neutral. "The military folks are real enough," she confirmed, "but getting there isn't as simple as just walking north. There's a massive horde between here and there, thousands of infected that got funneled into a valley when the army tried to create a containment zone. Anyone wanting to reach the safe zone has to either go around, which adds weeks to the journey, or find a way through that doesn't attract the Horde's attention. As their group settled in for what Patricia assured them would be a safe night's rest, Maya found herself in the truck stop's makeshift medical bay, treating minor injuries and illnesses among the various survivors who had gathered there. She worked alongside Nicole Williams, who had been a veterinary student before the outbreak and had adapted her medical knowledge to treating humans. "Your group is different," Nicole observed as they cleaned and bandaged an infected scratch on one of the children. "Most people who come through here are just focused on their own survival. You folks actually seem to care about helping others." The evening brought troubling news from Robert's radio communications. A group of raiders had been spotted moving north along the same route they planned to take, and several survivor settlements had gone silent in the past week. "These aren't just desperate people looking for food," Robert explained grimly. "They're organized, well-armed, and they've been systematically attacking anyone they think might have valuable supplies. Word is they're led by some former military types who decided that might makes right in this new world." Keisha absorbed this information with the tactical mindset that had kept them alive so far, already beginning to formulate plans for avoiding or confronting this new threat. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching from the south, multiple engines running at high speed, suggesting either fleeing survivors or pursuing threats. Through the windows they could see headlights cutting through the gathering darkness, and Patricia immediately began implementing what was clearly a well-rehearsed security protocol. "Everyone away from the windows," she commanded, while Robert grabbed a shotgun from behind the counter. "Could be nothing, but we don't take chances after dark." Zara had already moved to a position where she could cover the main entrance, while Amara began herding the children toward the back exit. The vehicles that pulled into the parking lot were military-style trucks, but the people who emerged from them wore mismatched clothing and carried weapons with the casual confidence of those accustomed to taking what they wanted. Maya counted at least 8 armed individuals, all moving with the coordination of a trained unit. "Raiders," Keisha whispered, recognizing the threat immediately. The leader of the group was a tall man with military tattoos covering his arms, and he approached the truck stop's entrance with the swagger of someone who expected compliance rather than resistance. "We know you're in there," the man called out, his voice carrying clearly through the reinforced glass doors. "We're not here to hurt anyone, just looking for supplies and information. Open up and we can do this the easy way." Patricia looked at Keisha with eyes that had seen too much violence already, and Maya could see the older woman calculating whether cooperation or resistance offered better odds of survival. The truck stop had become a sanctuary for dozens of travelers, and the decision they made in the next few moments would determine whether that sanctuary survived the night. Outside, the raiders were spreading out to surround the building, their movements suggesting they had done this many times before and knew exactly how to handle reluctant cooperation. The tension in the truck stop was suffocating as Patricia weighed their options, her experienced eyes studying the raiders through the reinforced glass while calculating the odds of survival for everyone inside. Maya could feel her heart pounding as she counted the innocent people who would be caught in the crossfire: 3 children, 2 elderly survivors, and several others who had no combat experience. Keisha moved silently through the building, positioning their group's fighters at strategic points while trying to avoid detection by the raiders outside. The leader continued his patient monologue, his voice carrying the false reasonableness of someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation rather than actual negotiation. "Look folks, we know Patricia Williams runs a tight ship here," the raider leader called out, demonstrating knowledge that made Maya's blood run cold. "We've heard good things about this place from other travelers. All we want is to trade for some supplies and maybe get some information about the road north. No need for anyone to get hurt over a simple business transaction." His words were carefully chosen to sound reasonable, but the way his men had positioned themselves around the building told a different story. These weren't desperate survivors looking for help. They were predators who had learned to use the apocalypse as cover for their true nature. Amara had quietly moved to the back of the building where she discovered that the raiders had made a critical mistake in their positioning. The rear exit was unguarded, apparently overlooked in their confidence that intimidation would be sufficient to gain entry. She caught Keisha's attention with a series of hand signals they had developed during their time together, communicating the tactical opportunity without alerting anyone else to their discovery. Jasmine, meanwhile, had found her way to Robert's radio equipment and was quietly attempting to contact other survivor groups in the area, hoping to call for assistance or at least warn others about the raider threat. The standoff continued for several tense minutes before Patricia made her decision. "We're going to let them in," she announced quietly to the group, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had survived by knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. "But everyone stays alert, and if shooting starts, the children and non-combatants head for the back exit immediately. Maya understood the logic. The truck stop's defenses were designed to keep out zombies, not determined human attackers, and a prolonged siege would only end in tragedy for the innocent people trapped inside. As Patricia moved toward the front door, Keisha caught her arm gently. "Let me do the talking," she suggested, her police training making her the natural choice for handling potentially violent negotiations. "I've dealt with people like this before and I know how to read the situation." Patricia nodded gratefully, stepping aside as Keisha approached the entrance with her hands visible but her weapon still within easy reach. The raider leader smiled as he saw movement behind the glass, his expression carrying the satisfaction of someone who believed he had already won. The door opened slowly, and Keisha stepped into the doorway without fully emerging from the building. "Evening," she said calmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to controlling dangerous situations. "I'm Keisha Williams and I speak for this group. What exactly are you looking for?" The raider leader's smile widened as he took in her confident demeanor, clearly recognizing a fellow professional. "Well, now that's more like it. Name's Colonel Marcus Reed, formerly of the 82nd Airborne, currently in the business of keeping people safe in these troubled times." Reed's introduction was carefully crafted to establish both his military credentials and his current role as a protector rather than a threat, but Keisha's trained eye caught the subtle signs that suggested otherwise. His uniform was a mixture of genuine military gear and civilian clothing, his weapons were well maintained but showed signs of recent use, and most tellingly, his men were positioned like raiders rather than soldiers. "What kind of supplies are you looking for, Colonel?" she asked, using his claimed rank while making it clear she wasn't intimidated by his military background. "Nothing too complicated," Reed replied, his tone remaining conversational despite the underlying threat. "Food, ammunition, medical supplies, the usual things that keep people alive out here. We're also looking for information about a group of women who've been causing trouble for honest survivors. 4 or 5 of them, well-armed, been interfering with legitimate salvage operations." Maya felt her blood turn to ice as she realized they were the target of this raid, that their reputation for helping survivors had somehow been twisted into a threat that needed to be eliminated. Keisha's expression didn't change, but Maya could see the subtle shift in her posture that indicated she was preparing for violence. "Can't say I've heard of any group like that," she replied evenly. "Most of the women I've met out here are just trying to survive like everyone else." Reed's smile became predatory as he stepped closer to the doorway, his hand moving casually toward his sidearm. "Funny thing about that, we have it on good authority that they were seen heading this way just yesterday. Wouldn't want to think that Patricia here was harboring fugitives." The accusation hung in the air like a loaded weapon, and Maya could see Patricia's face pale as she realized the true nature of their visitors. These weren't random raiders looking for supplies, they were specifically hunting for Maya's group, and they had tracked them to this sanctuary that had provided safety for so many other travelers. The implications were terrifying, suggesting that their reputation had spread far enough to attract the attention of organized criminals who saw them as a threat to their operations. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Keisha said carefully, her hand now resting openly on her weapon. "This is a neutral zone where all travelers are welcome, regardless of their past. If you're looking for specific people, you might want to try the road north. Lots of folks heading that way lately." Reed's patience was clearly wearing thin, and Maya could see his men beginning to shift their positions in response to some prearranged signal. The pretense of negotiation was about to end, and when it did, people were going to die. The first shot came from Zara's rifle, fired through a side window at one of the raiders who had been moving to flank the building. The man dropped instantly, his weapon clattering across the asphalt as Reed's facade of civility evaporated completely. "Take them alive if possible," he shouted to his men, "but don't let any of them escape." The truck stop erupted into chaos as windows shattered under gunfire and the innocent survivors inside scrambled for cover behind overturned tables and concrete barriers. Maya found herself pressed against the floor behind the counter, her medical training warring with her survival instincts as she heard people crying out in pain and fear. Through the chaos, she could see Amara leading the children and elderly survivors toward the back exit, while Jasmine worked frantically at the radio trying to broadcast a distress call to anyone who might be listening. Patricia and Robert had taken positions behind the restaurant's serving counter, their shotguns adding to the defensive fire that was keeping the raiders from advancing into the building. The battle for the truck stop had begun, and Maya knew that their survival would depend not just on their fighting skills, but on their ability to protect the innocent people who had trusted them with their lives. Outside, Reed's voice could be heard shouting orders to his men, his military training evident in the tactical coordination of their assault. But inside, 5 women who had learned to fight as a family were preparing to show these predators that some prey fought back with deadly efficiency. The gunfire intensified as Reed's raiders attempted to breach the truck stop's defenses, their military-style assault meeting fierce resistance from the defenders inside. Maya crawled along the floor toward a wounded survivor who had been caught in the initial exchange, her medical bag clutched tightly as bullets shattered merchandise displays above her head. The injured man was one of the travelers they had met earlier, a father of 2 who had been trying to reach his sister's farm in Tennessee when the outbreak began. Blood seeped through his shirt from a shoulder wound, but his eyes remained alert and determined as Maya began applying pressure to stop the bleeding. Keisha had taken command of the defense with the natural authority that had made her an effective police officer, coordinating their limited resources while maintaining communication with each defender. "Zara, keep them pinned down on the east side," she called out over the sound of gunfire. "Amara, how's our exit route looking?" From her position near the back door, Amara reported that the rear approach remained clear, but she had spotted movement in the tree line that suggested the raiders might be attempting to surround the building completely. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Maya knew they needed to act decisively before they became completely trapped. Patricia Williams proved to be far more formidable than her grandmother appearance suggested, her shotgun booming with deadly accuracy as she defended the main entrance alongside her husband Robert. "These bastards picked the wrong place to rob," she growled, ejecting spent shells and reloading with practiced efficiency. Her daughter Nicole had taken charge of the non-combatants, organizing them in the building's most protected area while distributing improvised weapons to anyone capable of fighting. The truck stop's regular customers had rallied to defend their sanctuary, transforming what should have been an easy raid into a costly siege. Jasmine's voice crackled over the radio as she finally made contact with another survivor group. "Mayday, Mayday, this is the Highway 85 truck stop under attack by armed raiders," she broadcast urgently. "Multiple casualties, requesting immediate assistance from any friendly forces in the area." The response came back almost immediately. A convoy of military vehicles was less than 20 minutes away, having been tracking the raider group for several days. Hope surged through the defenders as they realized rescue might be possible, but 20 minutes felt like an eternity when measured in gunfire and bloodshed. Reed's frustration was becoming evident in the increasingly reckless tactics his men employed, their disciplined assault giving way to desperate attempts to break through the truck stop's defenses. One raider attempted to breach the front entrance with an improvised explosive device, but Zara's precise marksmanship eliminated him before he could complete his mission. The explosion that followed shattered several windows and filled the air with smoke and debris, but the building's structure held firm. Maya used the confusion to move 3 more wounded survivors to safety, her medical training allowing her to work efficiently even under fire. The tide of battle began to turn when Amara discovered that one of the abandoned trucks in the parking lot still had fuel in its tank. Working with Jasmine, she rigged an improvised incendiary device that could be remotely detonated using components from the truck stop's electrical system. "If we can create enough chaos out there, we might be able to break their coordination," Amara explained to Keisha as she prepared the device. The plan was risky, requiring someone to venture outside the building's protection, but it offered their best chance of disrupting the raiders' assault before reinforcements arrived. Maya volunteered for the dangerous mission, her smaller size and medical training making her the logical choice for a stealth approach. "I can reach that truck without being seen if I use the drainage ditch along the parking lot's edge," she argued, despite Keisha's obvious reluctance to risk their medic. "Once I'm in position, I can treat any wounded raiders who might be willing to surrender, and I'll be ready to activate Amara's device if negotiations fail." The plan required split-second timing and absolute trust in each other's abilities, but they had learned that desperate situations demanded desperate measures. The crawl across the parking lot felt like the longest journey of Maya's life, every shadow potentially concealing a raider while every sound might betray her position to the enemy. She reached the abandoned truck just as Reed's voice echoed across the battlefield, offering terms that revealed his growing desperation. "Last chance, people," he shouted. "Send out the women we're looking for and everyone else walks away alive. Keep protecting them and we'll burn this whole place down with everyone inside." His ultimatum confirmed what Maya had suspected. This wasn't just a random raid, but a targeted hunt that put everyone in the truck stop at risk. From her position behind the truck, Maya could see that the raiders had taken casualties of their own. 2 men lay motionless near the building's entrance, while a third was attempting to treat his own gunshot wound with obvious inexperience. The sight of wounded enemies triggered her medical training, creating an internal conflict between her duty to preserve life and her need to protect the innocent people depending on her. She made her decision quickly, approaching the wounded raider with her hands visible and her medical bag clearly displayed. "I'm a nurse," she called out softly, causing the injured man to spin toward her with his weapon raised. "You're bleeding badly, and if you don't get treatment soon you're going to die." The raider was younger than she had expected, probably in his early 20s, with frightened eyes that suggested he was more follower than leader. "Why would you help me?" he asked suspiciously, his voice tight with pain and confusion. Maya knelt beside him slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Because that's what I do. I help people who are hurt, regardless of which side they're on." As Maya worked to stabilize the wounded raider, she learned valuable intelligence about Reed's operation. The young man, who introduced himself as Danny, had been recruited from a refugee camp with promises of safety and purpose. "The colonel said we were protecting people from bandits and zombies," he explained weakly as Maya cleaned his wound. "He never told us we'd be attacking places like this, hurting innocent folks." The revelation that Reed had been lying to his own men gave Maya an idea that might end the siege without further bloodshed. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder as the promised military convoy drew closer to their location. Reed's voice became increasingly frantic as he realized his tactical situation was collapsing, his demands for surrender giving way to threats of wholesale destruction. "You've got 30 seconds to send out those women, or I start executing hostages," he screamed, his military discipline finally cracking under the pressure of impending defeat. Maya knew that desperate men were capable of terrible things, and she activated Amara's incendiary device just as the first military vehicle crested the hill overlooking the truck stop. The explosion that followed lit up the night sky, creating enough chaos and confusion to allow the arriving military forces to engage the raiders from an advantageous position. Reed's men, caught between the truck stop's defenders and the approaching soldiers, found themselves in an impossible tactical situation. Some attempted to flee into the surrounding woods, while others threw down their weapons in surrender. Reed himself made a final desperate attempt to storm the building, but Keisha's precise marksmanship ended his threat permanently. As the gunfire finally ceased and the smoke began to clear, Maya emerged from her hiding place to find that their nightmare was finally over, and their reputation as protectors had been validated by the courage of ordinary people who had chosen to stand and fight rather than surrender to fear. The aftermath of the battle left the truck stop looking like a war zone, with shattered glass crunching underfoot and bullet holes scarring the walls that had provided sanctuary for so many travelers. Maya moved methodically through the debris, treating wounded survivors and even the surrendering raiders with the same professional care that had defined her nursing career before the world ended. The military convoy that had arrived just in time consisted of 3 armored vehicles and a medical truck, commanded by Captain Sarah Mitchell, a no-nonsense officer who immediately began coordinating the cleanup and prisoner processing with efficient military precision. Danny, the young raider Maya had treated during the siege, sat quietly against a concrete barrier while she finished bandaging his wounds. His eyes held a mixture of gratitude and shame as he watched his former comrades being loaded into military custody. "I never wanted to hurt innocent people," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the activity around them. "When the world went to hell, the colonel made it sound like we were the good guys, protecting civilization from chaos." Maya understood the appeal of Reed's lies. In a world where traditional authority had collapsed, people desperately wanted to believe in something larger than themselves, even if that belief led them down dark paths. Captain Mitchell approached Maya as she finished treating the last of the wounded, her expression carrying the respect of one professional for another. "Your group's reputation precedes you," she said, extending her hand in greeting. "We've been tracking Reed's raiders for weeks, and every survivor we've interviewed mentioned a group of women who helped them escape or fight back. You've saved more lives than you probably realize." The validation felt surreal after weeks of simply trying to survive from one day to the next, but Maya could see the truth of it in the faces of the people they had protected and rescued along their journey. The military's arrival brought news that changed everything about their mission to reach the northern safe zone. Captain Mitchell explained that the rumored sanctuary was real, but it was also under siege by a massive zombie horde that had been growing for weeks. "The situation up there is critical," she reported grimly. "They've got walls and supplies, but they're running out of ammunition and medical personnel. The brass has been looking for experienced fighters and medical staff to volunteer for a relief mission, and frankly, your group fits the profile perfectly." The opportunity to make a real difference was tempting, but Maya knew it would also be the most dangerous mission they had ever attempted. Keisha gathered their core group, Maya, Amara, Jasmine, and Zara, for a private discussion about their next move. The truck stop had become a symbol of hope for the survivors they had collected along the way, and leaving felt like abandoning the family they had built together. "We've got a choice to make," Keisha said, her voice carrying the weight of leadership that had been thrust upon her. "We can stay here and help Patricia rebuild this place into a permanent settlement, or we can volunteer for the relief mission and try to save thousands of people who are trapped in that safe zone." The decision would define not just their own futures, but the kind of legacy they wanted to leave in this new world. Patricia Williams had been listening from nearby, and she approached the group with the wisdom of someone who had seen enough of life to understand difficult choices. "You girls have already done more than anyone could ask," she said firmly. "This place will survive because you taught us how to fight for it. But those people up north, they need what you've learned, and they need the hope that comes from knowing someone cares enough to risk everything for strangers." Her words carried the blessing they needed to make their decision, even though it meant leaving behind the safety they had helped create. The volunteers for the relief mission assembled at dawn, a mixed group of military personnel, experienced survivors, and specialists like Maya whose skills were desperately needed at the besieged safe zone. Captain Mitchell had organized the convoy with military efficiency, but she made it clear that this was a volunteer mission with no guarantee of success or survival. "The zombie horde surrounding the safe zone numbers in the tens of thousands," she explained during the final briefing. "Our job is to break through their lines, deliver supplies and reinforcements, and help coordinate a breakout that will allow the survivors to reach more defensible positions." Jasmine had spent the night working with the military's communications specialists, developing a plan to use the safe zone's existing infrastructure to coordinate the relief effort. Her engineering background proved invaluable in understanding the technical challenges they would face, while her experience with their group's tactics helped bridge the gap between military doctrine and survivor improvisation. "The key is creating multiple distractions simultaneously," she explained to the assembled volunteers. "If we can fragment the horde's attention, we can create corridors that allow for both supply delivery and evacuation." Amara had been working with the military mechanics to modify their vehicles for the dangerous mission ahead. Her innovations included reinforced bumpers for pushing through zombie crowds, noise-making devices that could be deployed to redirect the horde's movement, and emergency escape hatches that would allow crew members to abandon vehicles if they became overwhelmed. "We're not just trying to get there," she explained to Maya as they loaded medical supplies into the convoy's ambulance. "We're planning for every possible way this could go wrong, and making sure we have options when it does." Zara had been studying intelligence reports about the safe zone's defenses and the zombie horde's behavior patterns, her military training allowing her to identify tactical opportunities that others might miss. "The horde isn't random," she reported to the group. "It's following predictable patterns based on noise and movement, which means we can manipulate its position if we're smart about it." Her analysis suggested that the relief mission had a better chance of success than the official estimates indicated, but only if they were willing to take calculated risks that conventional military thinking might reject. As the convoy prepared to depart, Maya found herself saying goodbye to the survivors they had rescued and protected during their journey. The children they had saved from the mall clung to her with tears in their eyes, while the elderly man whose life she had saved at the truck stop pressed a small wooden cross into her hands. "You carry our prayers with you," he said simply. "And you remember that you've already saved more lives than most people could in 10 lifetimes." The weight of their expectations was both inspiring and terrifying, but Maya knew that their journey had always been leading to this moment. The convoy rolled out as the sun climbed higher in the sky, leaving behind the truck stop that had become a symbol of hope and heading toward a mission that would test everything they had learned about survival, sacrifice, and the bonds that held humanity together even in its darkest hour. Maya sat in the ambulance, checking and rechecking her medical supplies while watching the landscape roll past through bulletproof windows. Somewhere ahead lay a safe zone filled with thousands of people who were counting on strangers to risk everything for their survival, and 5 women who had learned that the greatest strength came not from weapons or walls, but from the willingness to stand together against impossible odds. The radio crackled with reports from advanced scouts, painting a picture of devastation that grew worse with each mile they traveled north. Abandoned towns, burned-out vehicles, and the scattered remains of failed evacuation attempts marked their route like tombstones for a civilization that had died in a matter of weeks. But Maya also saw signs of hope: survivor camps that had learned to thrive, gardens growing in the ruins of suburban neighborhoods, and radio transmissions from other groups who refused to give up on the future. Their mission to the safe zone was just one battle in a larger war for humanity's survival, but it was a battle that could determine whether hope or despair would define the world they were fighting to rebuild. The northern horizon was painted black with smoke as the convoy crested the final hill before the safe zone, revealing a scene that defied comprehension even after weeks of witnessing the apocalypse's horrors. The military compound stretched across several square miles, its concrete walls rising 20 feet high and topped with razor wire that gleamed in the afternoon sun. But surrounding those walls was a sea of undead humanity that moved like a living tide, tens of thousands of zombies pressed against the barriers in a siege that had been ongoing for over a month. Maya felt her breath catch as she realized the true scope of what they were attempting. This wasn't just a rescue mission, it was an assault on hell itself. Captain Mitchell's voice crackled over the radio as she coordinated the convoy's approach, her military training evident in the calm precision of her commands despite the overwhelming odds they faced. All units, remember that our primary objective is getting medical supplies and personnel inside those walls. Secondary objective is establishing evacuation corridors for non-essential personnel. We go in fast, we go in hard, and we don't stop moving until we're either inside or dead. The bluntness of her assessment was both terrifying and oddly comforting. At least they all understood exactly what they were facing. Zara had positioned herself in the convoy's lead vehicle, her rifle ready and her tactical mind already calculating angles and distances as they approached the zombie horde's outer edge. Through her scope, she could see the safe zone's defenders on the walls, their weapons flashing as they tried to thin the undead masses below. "The good news is they're still fighting," she reported over the radio. "The bad news is they're running low on ammunition. I can see gaps in their defensive fire that weren't there an hour ago." Time was running out for the thousands of people trapped inside those walls, and their relief mission might be arriving just hours too late. The first phase of their assault began with Jasmine's electronic warfare, as she activated a series of noise-making devices that had been positioned around the Horde's perimeter during the night by advanced scouts. The cacophony of sirens, car alarms, and recorded human voices created multiple distraction points that began to fragment the zombie mass, drawing portions of the Horde away from the walls and creating the corridors they needed for their approach. "It's working," Amara reported from her position in the convoy's engineering vehicle. "We've got a clear path opening up on the eastern approach, but it won't last long once they realize the noise is artificial." Maya gripped her medical bag tighter as their ambulance accelerated toward the gap in the zombie lines, the vehicle's reinforced bumper smashing through scattered groups of infected that hadn't been drawn away by the distractions. Through the bulletproof windows, she could see individual zombies with horrifying clarity, a businessman still wearing his tie, a nurse whose scrubs were stained with blood and decay, a child whose school backpack bounced grotesquely as she stumbled after their vehicle. Each face was a reminder of the humanity that had been lost, and the humanity they were fighting to preserve. The convoy's vehicles moved in tight formation, their modified engines roaring as they carved a path through the undead masses toward the safe zone's main gate. Keisha coordinated their defensive fire from the convoy's command vehicle, her police training allowing her to direct their limited ammunition with maximum efficiency. "Conserve your shots," she commanded over the radio. "We need every bullet to count and we need to save enough for the trip back out." The reminder that they would eventually need to escape through the same zombie-infested terrain added another layer of complexity to their already impossible mission. The safe zone's gates began to open as their convoy approached, revealing a team of defenders who had been preparing for their arrival. Maya could see that the people inside the compound were in desperate condition, their faces gaunt from rationing, their movements sluggish from exhaustion, their eyes holding the hollow look of people who had been under siege for too long. But she also saw determination in their expressions, the same refusal to surrender that had carried her own group through countless dangers. These people had survived this long because they refused to give up, and that gave her hope that their mission might actually succeed. The convoy's entry into the safe zone was a masterpiece of coordinated chaos, with vehicles racing through the gates while defenders provided covering fire to keep the zombies from following them inside. Maya's ambulance was among the first to enter, and she immediately began triaging the wounded who had been waiting for medical attention. The safe zone's medical facilities were overwhelmed, with injured defenders lying on stretchers in hallways and storage rooms that had been converted into makeshift hospitals. "Thank God you're here," gasped Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the compound's chief medical officer, as Maya began unpacking her supplies. "We've been performing surgery with kitchen knives and treating infections with expired antibiotics." As Maya worked to stabilize the most critically injured patients, she could hear the sounds of battle continuing outside the walls. The zombie horde had been temporarily disrupted by their convoy's arrival, but it was already beginning to reform around the compound's perimeter. Zara had taken position on the walls with the other defenders, her marksmanship skills immediately making a difference in their ability to thin the undead ranks. "We've bought ourselves some time," she reported over the radio, "but not much. The Horde is adapting faster than we expected, and they're starting to pile up against the walls in some sections." Keisha had been meeting with the Safe Zone's military commander, Colonel James Harrison, to coordinate the evacuation of non-essential personnel. The plan was ambitious and dangerous. They would use the convoy's vehicles to transport civilians to a secondary safe zone 50 miles to the west, while a skeleton crew of volunteers remained behind to hold the compound until additional military support could arrive. "We can take maybe 200 people in the first run," Harrison explained grimly. "But that leaves over 1,000 still trapped here, and I'm not sure our defenses can hold much longer." Amara had been working with the Safe Zone's engineers to reinforce the walls and improve their defensive capabilities, but the news she brought back was sobering. "The eastern wall has stress fractures from the constant pressure," she reported to the leadership group. "If the zombies manage to create a pile-up in that section, the whole thing could come down. We need to either reduce the pressure on that wall or evacuate everyone before it fails." The engineering assessment added urgency to their evacuation plans, but it also meant they were racing against both time and structural failure. Jasmine had been working to establish communication links with other survivor groups and military units in the region, hoping to coordinate additional support for their mission. Her efforts had yielded mixed results. Several groups had promised to send help, but none could arrive in less than 12 hours, and the Safe Zone's defenses might not last that long. "We're on our own for now," she reported to the others. "But if we can hold out until tomorrow morning, we'll have reinforcements from 3 different directions." As night fell over the besieged compound, Maya found herself working by lamplight in the overcrowded medical bay, treating everything from infected wounds to malnutrition while the sounds of zombie moans echoed from beyond the walls. The people she treated told stories of loss and survival that mirrored her own journey: families separated by the outbreak, communities destroyed by the undead, and individuals who had found the strength to keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless. "You came back for us," whispered an elderly woman whose granddaughter Maya had just treated for dehydration. "When everyone else gave up on this place, you came back." The final phase of their mission began at dawn, as the convoy prepared for the most dangerous part of their operation, the evacuation run that would take them back through the zombie horde with vehicles full of civilians. Maya had volunteered to stay behind with the skeleton crew, her medical skills too valuable to risk on the dangerous journey to the secondary safe zone. As she watched Keisha, Amara, Jasmine, and Zara prepare to lead the evacuation convoy, she felt the same mixture of pride and fear that had defined their entire journey together. They had started as 4 women trying to survive, but they had become something more, a symbol of hope in a world that had forgotten what hope looked like. The convoy's departure was a moment of controlled chaos, with vehicles racing through the gates while defenders provided covering fire and the evacuated civilians huddled in terror as zombies pressed against the reinforced windows. Maya watched from the walls as her friends disappeared into the sea of undead, their vehicles carving a path through the horde with the same determination that had carried them through every challenge they had faced. The radio crackled with updates as they fought their way toward safety, each transmission a reminder that their mission was far from over and that the bonds forged in fire would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. As the sun climbed higher in the sky and the sounds of the convoy's engines faded into the distance, Maya turned back to her patience and her duty as a healer. The safe zone still held thousands of people who needed her skills, and somewhere beyond the zombie horde, her friends were proving once again that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to surrender to despair. Their story had begun with 4 women fighting to survive, but it would end with the knowledge that they had helped preserve the best of humanity in its darkest hour, and that sometimes the greatest victory was simply refusing to give up when giving up would have been easier.